Negotiators make little progress on a long-term ceasefire with Iran. Congress grapples with a historic shutdown, and the midterm elections continue to heat up as we inch closer to November.
We've got all that, plus your weather and sports updates tonight on District Dispatch.
Good evening and welcome to District Dispatch. I'm Will O'Connell.
And I'm Nicola Kumite. We're glad you're with us tonight. Now let's jump into the news.
The war with Iran is continuing, even though President Trump says peace talks are on the way. I went out to get more information on this developing story.
In the last 2 weeks, the United States and Iran have fallen into a hot war. Ayatollah Khamenei was killed in an airstrike, ports have been closed, and Iran has targeted American allies in the region, dropping missiles on American-backed targets in Kuwait, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. The military strikes, debates over Iran's nuclear capabilities, and the closing of the Strait of Hormuz have added complications of the conflict, both economic and geopolitical. Tensions today, including the hostility between Israel and Iran, have largely been a product of this tension, and the United States has not been shy about their intentions for the region.
There's been intelligence reports that indicate that Iran is nowhere near close by to develop a nuclear weapon. Obviously, there is potential for them to develop a nuclear weapon. However, it's not like they're close to reaching that capability anytime soon.
In 2015, President Obama signed the JCPOA, known by most as the Iran nuclear deal. In exchange for limiting their uranium enrichment and undergoing inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency, Obama agreed to lift American sanctions on Iran's economy, allowing them to tap into over $100 billion previously frozen by the UN. When Trump withdrew from the deal in 2018, Iranian tensions resumed to where they were pre-Iran deal. Following strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities last summer, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz temporarily, which not only isolated neighboring countries in the Persian Gulf, but threatened the stability of the worldwide economy. Nearly 20% of the world's oil supply comes through the Strait of Hormuz. The disruption of this flow has already hiked the price of oil to over $100 a barrel, and countries like Japan are in real trouble. Japan imports around 97% of their oil supply, with around 90% coming from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, both countries now blockaded in full by Iran. Iran maintains influence through a network of allied forces such as China and Russia, and further escalation could put U.S. troops, embassies, and our allies at increased risk. With global oil markets already shaken and diplomacy largely stalled, the coming weeks could determine whether this conflict remains contained or spirals into a large-scale regional war.
We have a guest today, Professor Babak Bahadur. He is the director of the Institute for Public Diplomacy at the George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs. Thank you so much for joining me.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so President Trump has changed his tune repeatedly day by day on this war, ranging from calls for peace to last week threatening to wipe out Iran on a total scale. How does that implicate the credibility of the United States in general? Does it influence our soft power at all?
Well, when it comes to soft power, I think what's happened is if you look at the kind of global surveys that have taken place by Pew and others, U.S. soft power appears to be diminishing based on metrics such as U.S. reputation and just the degree to which countries hold the United States in high admiration. That's been declining over the past year or so. So as a result of that, when foreign policy initiatives is taken, then different countries would probably react based on their own public opinion within their countries. And that means that the support that maybe would have been there in different scenarios is not there as much anymore.
Mm-hmm. And a big factor in this, obviously, is our relationship with the Israeli government. How would you say the United States is mitigating a rather sharp decline in support for Israel, both domestically and internationally?
Yeah, I've seen the numbers. They seem to have come down in terms of support for Israel. My understanding is around 2022, something like 15 to 20% net positive has gone down to, in the negative territory, somewhere between 5 and 10% for support for Israel. So that obviously plays into the calculation the president has to make.
Yeah, and overall, the Iran nuclear deal obviously was ripped up by the Trump administration in 2018. How would you say over the last 7-8 years do you think that's built up into the situation on the ground that we're seeing now?
Yeah, so I believe they were trying to take a harder position against Iran. Obviously, Iran has not a good human rights record, and Iranians in the United States are generally very much against the regime. So I think one thing that was interesting is that the Iranians in large numbers came out in support of Trump because of this one issue. Many of them were one-issue voters because they obviously see the human rights suffering in their countries, and they want regime change in their country. Many of them do, at least. So I think that plays, into the calculus in terms of domestic audiences. And of course, you mentioned the relationships with Israel as well as being another driving factor.
And then in the last few weeks, the Strait of Hormuz has been a very hot point of contention. How do you think that will affect both the economy and then also diplomatic harmony on the global stage?
Yeah, I think domestically, certainly, gas prices have gone up in the United States. The election isn't far away. So I think people are looking at inflation coming back, and all those things are weighing in on the decision to try to reach some kind of settlement, from what I can tell. The desire was to have regime change, and I think the assumptions made around that did not play out. A quick regime change with the toppling of, the elimination of the leadership. The regime was more resilient than people assumed, and as a result, it's hung on and has managed to, do some economic damage to the world economy, including the United States.
Yeah, well, that's all we have for us. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you dedicating your time to this, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
President Trump and his allies continue their mission to leave the president's physical mark on the nation. The administration has added President Trump's name to the Institute of Peace and hung banners with his photo from federal buildings. Florida Republicans officially changed the name of the Palm Beach airport to the Donald J. Trump International Airport, and congressional Republicans have moved to do the same with Washington's Dulles International Airport. Now, the administration is moving to add Trump's likeness to U.S. currency, which is seen as a violation of federal law that prohibits the likeness of a living person to be displayed on currency.
The Department of Homeland Security remains shuttered today as Congress remains unable to come to an agreement. Ananya Gandezi has the update.
As the partial government shutdown reaches a record 50-plus days, lawmakers are still in a stalemate of how to fund the Department of Homeland Security after the killings of 2 American citizens at the hands of federal officers in Minneapolis. But GOP hardliners believe they have the answer. The House Freedom Caucus tweeted on X Tuesday calling for the use of a reconciliation bill to fund all of DHS, writing, quote, "We cannot leave ICE and CBP hanging with hopes and prayers." It comes just a week after a deal was approved in the Senate but rejected by the House.
This gambit that was done last night is a joke. I'm quite convinced that it can't be that every Senate Republican read the language of this bill.
Shortly after, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune came together to create a 2-step plan that would separate funding for ICE and CBP from the rest of the departments in DHS. The plan was meant to lessen the pressure on overworked and underpaid TSA workers, while leaving time for negotiations. It was put in place just as lawmakers went on recess for 2 weeks. Now, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is calling for Senator Thune to bring back the lower chamber from recess to make progress on these talks.
There is a bipartisan bill that has been sent over from the Senate, not once, but twice. Every single Democrat, every single Republican in the Senate supports that legislation.
While the shutdown began in January, travelers began to feel the pain around early March as TSA agents began to quit in large numbers, work long hours without pay, and often called out sick from work. The pain on passengers has led the shutdown to become an extremely unpopular decision, with a study from Navigator Research showing that a majority of Americans blame Trump and Republicans for the current shutdown. As the GOP is split over whether to fund ICE and CBP or not, Democrats stand strong in their demands for changes to arrest tactics.
Let's unmask ICE, let's get the cameras on, and let's restore the rule of law in America.
They need to stop terrorizing communities in this country, stop harassing immigrants, stop trampling on people's constitutional rights in this country. Until that happens, we're not going to reopen the DHS and we're not going to fund them.
The shutdown comes as many Americans have begun to become more disillusioned with the larger deportation effort at hand from President Trump. Mosin Madawi, a Columbia student who led the pro-Palestinian protests at the university, is just one of the many people who were targeted for their First Amendment actions, and now he's seen that same treatment spread to everyone else in America.
The trust has been damaged to a point that is beyond repair.
After hundreds of thousands of arrests by ICE agents, the public is fired up about the issue and pushing for reform.
And creating level of intimidations, they are not for the people, and that's what is being shown.
For District Dispatch, I'm Ananya Gandezi.
Ananya is live right now with more information on where the shutdown is today. What can you tell us?
Yeah, well, so that 2-step bill that was mentioned before, those Senate Republicans are attempting to move ahead with that reconciliation bill now that will fund $65 to $75 billion of immigration enforcement. But as you saw there's very clear divisions about where to go. Now, there's 3 central camps of what's happening here. One group wants to fund just immigration enforcement within DHS, which is John Thune. And you have another camp that wants to fund everything else besides DHS, and then a final camp that wants to fund everything together, as you heard from the House Freedom Caucus. But it's going to be really hard to get all of those groups together, especially by the deadline that President Trump has set for June 1st. He wants to see immigration enforcement funded through the rest of his term. Senate Majority Leader John Thune can only stand to lose 3 votes with a tiebreaker from Vice President J.D. Vance, even if that ends up happening. But again, hardliners like the House Freedom Caucus and other people will definitely find issue with what's going on. And as we know, a bigger bill is going to mean a longer time to actually pass through. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who is the budget chairman, is expected to release a blueprint of what that's going to look like next week. But again, even if it goes to the Senate, it's going to have to go through the House again, which we know the House has repeatedly rejected of what it looks like. The biggest impact here is certainly workers. Furloughed DHS workers are being ordered to get back to work, according to CBS. And with the World Cup coming up, 11 host cities might start to see more travel delays because of increased people in airports. Certainly the pain and the pressure is coming for travelers and the workers at FEMA, at TSA, at these other places besides immigration enforcement. So we're just going to have to stand to see where that ends up going, whether the Senate will end up passing that bill, and what happens with travelers. Back to you, Will.
Thanks a lot, Ananya.
Well, it's election season in America. Throughout the spring and summer, Americans will cast votes in primary elections to decide which candidates will face off in the general. To better understand the state of the race, I spoke with Logan Phillips, the political forecaster behind Race to the White House, and Ethan Kelly, a communications specialist behind Kamala HQ and currently working on Team Tallarico. The road to the 2026 midterm elections is officially underway. Over the next several months, voters will decide all 435 seats in the House of Representatives and about 1/3 of the U.S. Senate. And with Congress narrowly divided, even a small shift in seats could determine which party controls Washington. But this midterm cycle is unusual. It is the first midterm in more than a century to take place during a non-consecutive second presidential term after President Donald Trump returned to the White House in 2024. Besides the historical aspect, the Trump administration faces particular challenges to unpopular policies both domestically and abroad. Historically, the president's party often loses seats in midterm elections, making this cycle especially competitive. Democratic communications specialist Ethan Kelly, who is currently working with Team Tallarico, says messaging is already a major focus this cycle.
I think campaigns are very quickly picking up, both on the left and the right, that, like I said, this midterm election being a referendum on the president is that a lot of voters are looking for an alternative vision for America.
Campaigns are also focused on turnout. Midterm elections typically see fewer voters than presidential years, meaning organizing supporters can make all the difference in close races.
I mean, people want to see you showing up in the communities, and I think that, a bunch of campaigns getting closer to November are going to start kicking it up into high gear.
Polls suggest several issues are already shaping the political debate heading into November. Voters say the economy, immigration, and rising global tensions are among the top concerns as they evaluate candidates' parties.
Like that's happening right now. And so that's why so many of these elections have been changed elections, right? But instead of making things more affordable, it's really, really obvious to voters that that has not been a priority of Donald Trump. And it's not just that things have gotten worse, it's that they can specifically and easily, even without paying much attention, be able to identify things that Donald Trump has done that have made the problem dramatically worse.
Pollsters say the political environment heading into 2026 also remains deeply divided.
Trump is very good at thrilling his base, and he struggles at winning the rest of the country over often.
With months of campaigning still ahead, strategists say the race for Congress is only just beginning, and the results in November could shape national politics for years to come. For District Dispatch, I'm Nicole Kumite. We have another special guest joining us to talk about the elections in more detail. Professor Peter Loge is the director of the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University. Professor Loge, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
So when I spoke with Logan and Ethan, this concept of the midterm serving as a referendum often came up. Gallup is estimating that President Trump's approval rating is at a record low of 36%. How will this affect the midterms?
It's certainly not a good year to be a Republican incumbent member of the House. President Trump's numbers are low and falling. Voters, by and large, want stuff to work, right? They want to be able to just pay their bills, send their kids to college, afford GW's tuition. And right now, that's not happening. And if voters see things that aren't working, they tend to kick out the party in power. That happens to be Republicans. Bad year to be a Republican.
Should we expect to see this blue wave that forecasters are predicting?
It depends how big a wave, right? Former Speaker Pelosi was here in SMPA earlier this week, said 100 seats are in play. I think it's wildly optimistic. I think the Democrats will pick up, 15, 20, maybe 30 if it's a really big year. But it's important to remember that this isn't voters saying they love Democrats. It's voters saying a pox in all your houses. We don't like any of y'all. We just like Republicans less than Democrats. Voters, a lot of us, are just tired of stuff being chaotic and not seeming to work, which means rent's high, we're starting more wars. What's going on? Let's just get back to stuff seeming like it's relatively normal. And I think the party that can articulate that can say, we're real people who care about stuff that really matters to you, we're going to fix stuff, is the party that's going to do well.
I want to switch gears here and talk about gubernatorial races. About, I believe, 39 governors are up for re-election or election this time around, and what we should expect to see on the governor's landscape.
That's a really good question. Governors are in a bit of a different position. They're partisan, obviously, but governors have to do stuff like mayors, right? It's about transportation, it's about who's plowing the snow, you picking up the garbage, stuff like that. And I think that voters locally, in basically every election since Trump's re-election, voters have rejected Republicans. Democrats have won a lot of races that weren't expected to win. There's a special election in Florida that elected a Democrat to represent Mar-a-Lago, for example. So this is another case where if Democrats at a statewide level, a governor's level, can say, I'm going to make stuff work. I'm going to fix stuff's out of control. I'm not going to worry about Washington, but here in Maine, for example, a race I'm watching pretty closely, we're going to make stuff work. I think voters will respond to that. They're tired of the Washington nonsense. They really just want things to function, and governors are in charge of making things work. They're in charge of things like roads.
So with all of this considered, how can the midterms foreshadow what we might see in 2028?
That's a really good question. There's a fair amount of research that says that the more knowledgeable or more insider somebody is about politics, the less likely they are to be able to predict well. There's one study by a guy named Phil Tetlock who found that dart-throwing monkeys are better predictors of political outcomes than people like me, so be super cautious about listening to anything I say. That said, President Trump has never been wildly popular in this country. Even when he won a majority of the electoral vote last time, but he still only got about 49.5% of the popular vote. His popularity is falling. Basically, every race since his election has either gone Democratic in big ways, 31-point swing in a race in Texas, or they've really closed the margins, including in Georgia for Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat. If those trends continue, that's obviously very bad news for Republicans. Again, potentially good news for Democrats, but it's not an endorsement of Democrats. Right? One interesting race to watch this year to see what's going to happen in 28 is a race in Montana, right, where you have a Republican candidate who's really conservative. You've got a Democratic candidate who's really not showing up in the polls because it's Montana. We have an independent candidate who has the support of former Senator John Tester, a Democrat, and former Governor Mark Roscoe, who's a Republican. And they're trying to sort of reinvent how they do politics a bit in Montana. I think how that goes, how voters respond, and how that gets explained will be something really interesting to watch going to 28.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio, Professor Loge.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. As voters continue to head to the polls across the country, D.C. residents continue to live alongside a presence of troops in the city. Ryan J. Carlin spoke to one of those troops.
7 months after deployment, over 2,500 National Guard troops from 9 states continue to patrol the streets of D.C. When President Trump made his announcement in August claiming complete and total lawlessness in the city, he did not give an end date for the deployment. That date, later given by the Joint Task Force for the District of Columbia, has now been pushed back to at least the end of 2026. Although crime rates have been falling in the district for years, they did continue to sharply fall amid the deployment, and President Trump has claimed success in his mission to eradicate crime in the city.
In Washington, D.C., we have the lowest crime numbers they've had in years. Zero, it sounds like it's a horrible thing to say, but I might as well say it, 0 murders.
Although President Trump has said crime has been absolutely eradicated in the district, that's not exactly true, with crime levels falling, but still a big problem in the district. Seen patrolling outside the Foggy Bottom GWU metro station, National Guard Sergeant Christian Figuerello says he feels that the deployment has been beneficial to the city.
I do know that we get reports on the radios or whatever, we come back and debrief at the end of the shift. A lot of Narcan disbursement, a lot of people that really shouldn't be on the streets, we're taking them out, keeping the people safe. People that need help, bringing them to hospitals, just doing that, I think that's a good enough impact.
Despite any positive impacts, many D.C. residents still want to see the National Guard gone. Natasha Burke, a student at George Washington University, says she doesn't feel the deployment has made the city safer.
I just feel like people are going to find ways to still do it. I don't think that there's much of a change, like to have National Guards and then more police. I don't think it makes much of a difference.
The end of the deployment has always been an open question, with some worried that it will drag on as leaders struggle to find a way to maintain the positive effects while ending the troop presence. Joshua Brown, longtime police officer and expert in criminal justice, said he can't say when the deployment should end, but that he hopes leaders are working on what an end to the chapter would look like.
So I hope that they have a plan and they can find a way to work together with the local partners, and maybe the political realities are such that the constituents want more enforcement.
In Washington, I'm Ryan J. Carlin.
With present ICE authorities around the DMV area, students from immigrant communities are affected. Sarah Montalvo-Ona has the story.
The Latino Student Fund in Washington, D.C. aims for educational services among children from different communities. This is a sort of refugee among families who support their kids to receive all sorts of help from school outside the classroom.
We are every Saturday helping the students from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. This is a tutoring program that we serve children underserved in the schools, and we support them to reach and to control and give enrichment in those gaps they need. Some materials that they cannot cover at school, we are here to help. Individualized curriculum that we manage is helping them in any area.
Erika Padilla, the coordinator of the tutoring program, said the intervention of ICE officials across the country has created a strong feeling of terror among families.
With immigration, we lost a lot of families because some of them are not legally in the United States. And we don't ask about their immigration status, but they came to us and said, like, oh, we don't want to lose the spot, but we are helping them, providing like materials. They pick up the materials and they work from home.
Although Padilla said the police have no intervention in their program, the location in Cathedral Heights has created uncertainty and insecurity for Hispanic families.
The area where we are located is quiet, but still they are afraid because we have security outside, and now they don't know who trusts.
Padilla explained that this program is beneficial for both parents and students, showing success in college applications and transfers between institutions across the area.
Another programs that help the families to complete the applications when they want to transfer the students from public schools to a private one.
Although there is a strong wave of terror across all the country, organizations like the Latino Student Fund help the families that are most in need and make education a priority. I'm Sarah Montalvo reporting from Washington, D.C. for District Dispatch.
King Charles and Queen Camilla of the United Kingdom will be in Washington next week for the King's first state visit to the U.S. since taking the throne. King Charles is expected to deliver a speech to Congress in addition to attending a state dinner at the White House.
When we get back, an update on the situation in Sudan, the AI revolution, and the cherry blossoms, which recently hit peak bloom. Stay with us.
Welcome back. Now let's take a look at what's happening across the world.
A fatal conflict continues to unfold in Sudan, where a prolonged civil war is pushing the country to the brink of collapse. Here's Isabella Owens with the latest.
Sudan is currently facing one of the world's worst humanitarian crises as the civil war between the country's government and the RSF wages on. Since the start of the war nearly 3 years ago, it's estimated that hundreds of thousands of people have been killed and millions have been displaced. Those who are unfortunate enough to still be trapped in the country are facing brutal acts of violence. Satellite images depicting an abnormally discolored ground indicate the presence of mass graves. Videos have also begun circulating of the RSF committing public executions, as well as Sudanese women recounting the severe sexual violence they've been forced to endure. This war has also caused a complete destruction of Sudan's infrastructure, leaving many to go without necessary resources, while international aid is struggling to reach the Sudanese.
They're really limited in their ability to get deep into the country. The roads are not safe. Staff have been killed. Large-scale humanitarian, like truck convoys, that's extremely difficult. And, that volume of aid is needed. There's famine in many parts of the country, but the ability of the international humanitarian organizations to actually reach and deliver the aid is severely limited.
Experts say the difficulty in delivering aid is only part of the larger challenge facing Sudan. Due to the funding of outside parties, the conflict has no near end in sight. The UAE has been accused of backing the RSF, while countries including Egypt and Saudi Arabia are backing the national military. Ensuring long-term stability will require major political changes within the country and may even call for international intervention.
When we finally see a transition to a civilian government again, there has to be, it will not work unless there's a complete rebuilding of the security forces, of the army, and of any other kind of security force that the country has. Absolutely, it can be done. We just need to get the underlying conflicting parties off the stage. They should not be part of the solution. They are only the problem.
Until a ceasefire is reached, millions across Sudan remain caught in this devastating conflict that continues to escalate. I'm Isabella Owens, District Dispatch.
President Trump considers pulling the United States out of NATO after the recent developments of the war in Iran. Although Congress passed legislation last year that prohibits any president from leaving NATO without approval, President Trump claims that he has the authority to do so. If President Trump challenges this law, it would set a precedent in U.S. politics. The talks of the withdrawal from the U.S. also leads to concerns from NATO allies such as the UK. It stands to see if the president's challenge will be successful.
Now for the latest in technology. The AI controversy continues. Americans are now using AI to find jobs, but many are concerned on its reliability. For more on this development, we have Odell Say.
Artificial intelligence tries on a new role as a job agent. No generation knows this better than the college students of Gen Z. But many college students, like Sarah and Kundif, grapple with the choice to use AI to get jobs.
Recently, I actually applied to be an RA at my school, which that I needed like a resume and short responses for a couple different questions. And looking back, I think AI definitely could have been a very helpful tool when I was making my resume.
As more college students learn about AI, there are growing concerns on the best ways to use it to apply for jobs. Many career experts, like Majid Hassabu, help students learn best AI practices.
Use it as a tool to improve your resume or to provide you with some guidelines, but not more than that.
Hassabu also learns from hiring managers that the more college students depend on AI, the less authentic their job applications are. While students continue to look for jobs, unemployment rates continue to rise. Hassabu believes that using AI could help with that problem if used right.
If you're using it as a tool, which is what we're hearing from employers, such as something that will make you think quicker, or for you to use, let's say, the template of a resume and then kind of personalize it, that is the way that we suggest to our students to use it and what we're hearing from employers.
Though some Americans use websites such as JobScan and ChatGPT, people are still split on the good and bad of AI.
I feel like I'm very pro AI when it comes to things like that. Cutting out human error and things like that. I definitely think where it starts becoming an issue, where I think there should be a lot of limitations, is with, people asking AI to write something and then submitting it as their own work.
Although AI has gained controversy these past few years, it has become increasingly popular with workers online. It stands to see if the workplace will embrace these new changes. This is Odell Say with District Dispatch in Washington, D.C.
Beyond AI, technology continues to cause concern. Data centers are popping up all over the country, and many are being planned or are already here in the DMV. Eleanor Baby has the story.
Data centers are huge facilities used to store computer systems. They are an integral part of the global information system since they house cloud services, machine learning, and data needed for artificial intelligence. However, as AI becomes more integrated into society, the demand for these data centers is increasing, and their environmental impact is largely unregulated. Just across the river in Virginia, according to the Data Center Mapping Database, there are 570 facilities and counting. Most are concentrated in Northern Virginia and areas like Ashburn, Sterling, and Vienna. I'm standing outside of a CoreSite data center in Reston, Virginia. As you can see, it's pumping out a lot of smoke into the atmosphere, and you might also be able to hear some of the loud buzzing around us. This is one of the main providers of data centers in Virginia, and this is their third location. These data centers are a major environmental concern for many because of their reliance on fossil fuels. Advocacy group Nature Forward names 7 key issues that they feel need further regulation: transparency, backup diesel use, power generation, transmission lines, water, land use, and noise pollution. Lisa Goodnight, a representative from the organization, has some more insight into their work and advocacy.
Data center developments have often moved forward without a lot of public input and without a lot of oversight. And so the reason why we have so many bills and the reason why we're looking at this at so many different angles is because it's an uphill battle, to be quite honest. It's an uphill battle. There are data centers like all over the place. The growth is just intense. And so we want to use every lever that we can to push for sustainable data centers.
That is why several organizations across the U.S. are directly opposing new data centers being built. In Montgomery County, Maryland, residents are pushing back on plans to build more facilities in the region. Some of the opposers' main concerns are rising electricity and water bills.
Yeah, I think that everyone should become educated on this issue because it's an issue that affects us all. And I think that when we become educated, we can use our voice, we can talk to our elected officials, and we can ask for sensible development, which is something that they themselves should want to do.
This is Ellie Bavey for District Dispatch.
Warming weather is affecting drinking water in regions across the U.S. During the winter, plants and trees usually absorb fertilizers and pesticides from the frozen ground. But due to climate change, these grounds are melting faster. With less plants and trees, the chemicals from these substances are running off into bodies of water used for drinking. With President Trump's recent push to limit the power of the EPA, farmers may have less support in fighting these dangers.
Continuing with the environment, we have details on the state of tree health just after DC's iconic cherry blossom season.
After a 54-mile sewer pipe collapsed into the Potomac River, concerns began to emerge over the underlying consequences of DMV tree loss in preparation for the hot summer. Here's Sydney Dalton with the story.
DC's leafy canopy is a staple for protection from the summer sun, but hotter summers and milder winters had weakened the historically old trees of the district, leaving branches snapped and leaves browned early.
Urban development and climate change has contributed to the loss of trees within the DMV, with the sewage spill further contributing loss of habitat for DC's native tree population.
On January 19th, a 54-mile Potomac Interceptor sewer pipe collapsed near Cabin John, Maryland, releasing over 240 to 300 million gallons of untreated wastewater, resulting in, at times, 12,000 times the safe limit for diseases such as E. coli. While officials urged the public to avoid interacting with the rivers until the pollutants are cleared, this spill leaves underlying consequences and reveals growing concerns over DMV tree loss. Decisions made by officials will hasten the dramatic and long-term change in the district's treescape that also stands to impact bird and insect populations. Eli Kintish, climate journalist and Ted Turner Professor of Environmental Media at the George Washington University, says that cities and residents should be concerned about climate change and its immediate effects.
Climate change is an issue that's affecting us today here in Washington and in almost every city in the world. As DC takes on a climate that's more and more akin to Atlanta or Tallahassee or maybe in 20 years Miami, this city will transform in ways that most of the infrastructure and most of our social infrastructure are not prepared to withstand.
DC is known for its trees, especially during their popular cherry blossom season, which often occurs between late March and early April. DC Water has been collecting daily E. coli samples to determine when the water can be opened up, though the spill may already deter tourists from traveling to see the blossoms, which can have economic impacts on DC for the spring. Kintish believes that the responsibility of tree care falls on cities, rather than employing its citizens to track their individual climate footprints.
The notion of climate footprint is actually a corporate idea that was created to respond to criticisms of industry. And so, if anything, we need to emphasize big structural societal changes over individual decisions.
Other organizations and nonprofits have stepped up to replant and nurture at-risk trees, including the Chesapeake Climate Action Network and KC Trees, who focus on planting and protecting the city's tree canopy.
Reporting for District Dispatch, I'm Sydney Dalton from Washington.
Coming up tonight, your weather update, new details on the Commander Stadium, and the latest in sports. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. Spring weather in DC always feels unpredictable, but thankfully we have an update on what to expect for this week's weather. Let's take a look.
This is your District Dispatch weather update. The DMV area will be facing near record high temperatures for the next few days. On Sunday, a cold front will make its way into the area, bringing a few showers and cooler temperatures, with highs on Monday and Tuesday being in the mid-60s. The DMV area continues to remain in a moderate drought status with no signs of improvement as we move into higher temperatures. That's all for your weather update. Back to you in the studio.
Here in Washington, the public remains enthralled by the National Zoo's pandas Bao Li and Qing Bao, who seem to be developing a bit of a romance. Still years away from adulthood, the adolescent bears have been seen flirting with each other through the window between their enclosures. If the pandas did end up making a baby, it would be the first panda born in the U.S. since 2020.
As DC leaders continue discussions about the future of the RFK Stadium site, neighbors who want to live right next door say they want a stronger voice in what comes next. Ashley Robinson has more.
The future of the RFK Stadium site has sparked debate across DC. For residents in Kingman Park, it's more than a development plan. It's their backyard. Any construction surrounding the future home of the Washington Commanders would mean more traffic and changes to infrastructure, impacting the Kingman Park community year-round, not just on game days.
We're not a downtown stadium where, people drive in for work, they come in for game day, and then it's kind of a ghost town. There's people here all the time.
Pazmino says neighbors would welcome things like a grocery store, local businesses, and spaces the community can use all year long. She also says growth shouldn't come at the cost of what makes Kingman Park unique.
Residents here say one thing is clear. They want development at the former RFK Stadium site to benefit the people who already call this neighborhood home.
It's a great opportunity for our neighborhood to have all of this economic development. We just don't want any of that economic development to come at the cost of the great culture that we have in Kingman Park.
Pazmino also points to environmental concerns. She says the current stadium plan includes 8,000 parking spaces inside of 3 garages, which would be the largest in DC history. She hopes leaders will improve public transit to the stadium on the Metro, which can bring up to 25,000 fans to the stadium per hour. In a recent statement, the Commanders said the stadium will feature new outdoor plazas, public spaces, and green areas.
I'm hoping that we can, address everyone's concerns. No one's going to be totally happy with this project, but I'm hoping that everyone will actually have a seat at the table and we can have a stadium for the future and not the past.
No matter what rises on this site, Kingman Park residents say the goal should be economic growth without losing the character of the community. The new stadium is expected to open in 2030. For now, many details remain in the planning stages. Ashley Robinson, District Dispatch in Washington, D.C.
Now we turn to the latest in sports.
Today in sports, we've got a busy lineup across the board. The Washington Wizards are wrapping up a tough regular season at 17-65. While the Wizards head into the offseason looking to rebuild,
The rest of the league is gearing up for the NBA playoffs starting April 18th. On the ice, the Washington Capitals just missed the playoffs for the first time since 2023. Still, it was a historic year for Alex Ovechkin, who recently became only the second player ever to reach 1,000 career goals, combining the regular season and playoffs. Baseball is back, and the Washington Nationals are sitting at a 7-8 record. The focus early on, development, consistency, and seeing which players can be part of the long-term core.
When we come back, Michigan's sky-high twist on the classic Easter egg hunt. Stay with us.
Welcome back. Detroit, Michigan's annual Marshmallow Drop took place earlier this month. At this event, kids from all over the state gather while a helicopter drops marshmallows from the sky. Unfortunately, the kids can't actually eat the marshmallows, but they can catch them in exchange for other treats with the event's leaders.
That'll do it for tonight. Thank you for joining us here on District Dispatch. Stay classy.